Now we'll get on to housing.
Thank you.
Minister, why does there appear to be little governance or restriction on overseas ownership of existing residential property and newly constructed residential property?
Well, I think we answered this earlier today, but it wasn't the issues that were to be referred to the ATO over essentially the approvals to buy for foreign investors to buy.
I want to put it in context so that the ATO understands. So, many countries do not allow foreign ownership of their residential property. Why does Australia allow foreign investment in residential property with minimal restriction?
Is that to the ATO?
To you, Minister.
Well, I think as I went through this morning, there are restrictions in place, and it is something the government
On
monitors.
older properties, but not on newly constructed or first residency. Isn't that correct?
No, well, I mean, for foreign investors, it is targeted at new properties, unless you get an exemption, is my understanding. But we don't have that.
What's the
those group of officials here.
We've got our Deputy
We don't
Commissioner
have
of
they've gone, but that was the evidence this morning.
We've got our Deputy Commissioner of International here that is responsible for the registers that we maintain, and he will try to answer any.
So you're purely a registry?
No, Hector Thompson, Deputy Commissioner, International Support Programs. So I think, as was touched on this morning, in the residential property space, the foreign investment regime essentially seeks to sort of promote the growth development of housing stock, and the way it does that is by restricting foreign investment to new builds, development of existing builds or vacant land. There's only one circumstance in which approval for an established dwelling will be granted under that regime, and that's for temporary residents, and those properties will need to be divested when that person ceases to be a temporary resident.
So established properties cannot be purchased by foreigners?
The scenario where an established property will gain approval to be purchased by a foreigner is where they're a temporary resident.
Right, but other than that... sorry?
And is it their primary residence, isn't it?
They will be required to live in that.
But other than that, they can't purchase?
That's right.
Sorry? Correct.
Other than that, they can't purchase existing residential property?
Correct.
Can they build a new property?
So there's, broadly speaking, three classes of properties that a foreign resident might get approval to purchase. One would be vacant land. One would be to redevelop an existing property, so you could perhaps subdivide, you could convert a single dwelling into two dwellings, or a new build, yes.
Thank you. Doesn't it still mean, though, that the system is fairly unregulated?
Sorry, I missed
Doesn't it mean that the system is still fairly unregulated? People can come in and develop?
So there'll be conditions around our approval. So there'll be a time period. Like, for example, if you were to seek approval to develop an existing property, there would be time periods around that approval granted. So it's not an open-ended approval.
Do you know how many properties are being redeveloped or developed every year from foreign ownership?
So we have a product. So I probably don't have to that level of detail. We have a register of foreign ownership of residential land that we publish every year, and that actually breaks down transactions by the sorts of. So I think it breaks it down between vacant land, established dwellings, and new dwellings. So that would be probably the most disaggregated split I can provide.
So, Minister, I'm being asked to wind up. Wouldn't the widening of the mandate of the ATO to include all residential purchases by foreign purchasers go a long way to slowing down the sale of residential properties to foreign speculators?
So would it just take me through that again?
Wouldn't the widening of the mandate of the ATO to include all residential purchases by foreign purchases by foreign purchasers go a long way.
They do.
I think, Senator, we do, and some are
So
not
you register all?
allowed. Some are not allowed, and some are allowed, depending on their circumstances. So all purchases asked by foreigners to be made are looked at and regulated.
Yes, it might be helpful. I know there was some conversation this morning, so it is a requirement to seek approval to purchase properties if you're a foreign resident. We do undertake compliance activity. We do, in some cases, force divestment of properties. There was a reference made to a civil matter in 2022 where the court imposed penalties of $250,000 on an individual for purchasing 4 properties without approval.
How many existing residential properties have been bought by foreign purchasers for each year over the last 5 years?
We'd probably take that on notice, I think.
We can take that on.
We certainly had some figures that we gave you, I think, for the might be the 2021 year. But I think if you want us to go back 5 years, we'd take that on notice.
What monitoring is in place to keep track of foreign purchases of existing residential properties?
Senator Roberts, can I ask you to see if you can't put your questions on notice? We do need to wind up.
I have 4 years.
That'd be good. I can put most of them on notice. How many residential properties, new or existing, are sitting vacant after purchase by foreign purchasers? Do you track things like that?
So there is a regime that is known as the vacancy fee, and under that regime, foreign owners are required to notify us if the property is vacant, and if they fail to notify us in a given period, we deem the property to be vacant, and there is a vacancy fee charged for that.
Okay, thank you. I'll put the rest of the questions on notice.
Thank you, Senator Roberts.
Chair,